Folks, good morning to you. Welcome. Gives me great pleasure now to call the Director of Library Services, Mrs. Joyce Meaza, to address you and to do the introduction of our Deputy Vice Chancellor.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Normally there is a nice table here which is meant to hide whatever that you're carrying, so that when you speak, people will assume that you're clever. Now there is no such. It's not fair. Okay, my task is to introduce my boss, Professor Diresh Ramjagannath. Professor Diresh Ramjagannath holds a degree in chemical engineering from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which he obtained in 1993. He graduated then with a PhD in engineering, chemical engineering, from the University of Natal in 2001. He is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research since March 2017. At the University of KwaZulu-Natal, prior to this appointment, he was the Pro Vice Chancellor, Innovation, Commercialization, and Entrepreneurship. He also holds the DST/NRF South Africa Research Chair, Fluorine, Process Engineering, and Separation Technology at the University of Natal. This is since September 2007. He is also the Director of the Thermodynamics Research Unit since January 2004. He was appointed full Professor of Chemical Engineering at the age of 31 in January 2004 at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor Ramjagannath works closely with the chemical industry in South Africa and internationally, and has undertaken numerous contracts and research projects. He has served as a non-executive director on a number of boards. He is also an entrepreneur and runs startup companies which have been spin-off from his research at the university. He has also established numerous international collaborations with universities and industry abroad. He has to date published in excess of 300 peer-reviewed journal papers and over 340 national and international conference papers. He has also authored numerous consulting and technical reports. In addition, he has published numerous chapters in books and has 7 patents which he has been either granted or filed. He has also successfully graduated 75 masters and 34 PhD students, as well as supervised over 25 postgraduate students. Professor Ramjagannath has been the recipient of numerous awards and recognition, including the NRF President's Award in 2005, NSTF Awards in 2006 and 2010, UKZN Vice Chancellor's Awardee in 2010, inducted as a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa in 2012, inducted as a Fellow of the South African Academy of Engineers in 2013, inducted as the Fellow of the African Academy of Science in 2015, Fellow of UKZN in 2017, South African Institute of Chemical Engineers Gold Medal in 2013, South African Institute of Chemical Engineers Innovation Awards in 2013, to name the few, which obviously it means there are more. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Professor Ramjagannath.
Good morning, distinguished speakers that we're going to have over the next 3 days, delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, it gives me great privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the Westville campus this morning, and to the, I'm getting old now, you see, even though I was professor at a young age, I got to get these things now to help me read. So to this conference, which basically celebrates the International Open Access Week. And I was looking at the documentation that Faith gave to me, and I must thank Faith and the library team for putting together this conference and workshop. And it seems that the theme for the next few days is going to be open in order to make scholarly research visible. And that's something that is extremely important. So I think many of us come from the academic background. So I see that we got speakers on the program over the next few days that come from academia, and in particular from higher education institutions. But we also have some speakers that come from our academies in the country, the South African Academy of Sciences, and then also from some of the major publishing houses, international publishing houses that are based in South Africa. So welcome to all of you. Now, being in an academic environment, I think we all know the cliche phrase, right? Publish or perish. And it's been something that we've learned about at University of KwaZulu-Natal very well over the last 10, 15 years. In fact, there's been a determined drive on part of the university to ensure that our academics become research active, but not just research active, but actually start to publish. And when we look at how academics publish, they publish in conference proceedings, conference presentations, they publish in books, they publish in book chapters, but predominantly the major form of publishing, and the one which most universities in this country drive, is publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And there's kind of been this habit over the years that if you want your work to be known, because if you look at what we do in the higher education institutions, we basically generate knowledge, we transfer knowledge, we disseminate the knowledge that we generate. And recently, we actually also start to see how we can actually exploit that intellectual property that we produce at the institutions for some sort of commercial gain. That's been another agenda. And you look at the new strategy for the University of KwaZulu-Natal, you'll see the strategy wheel. And in the strategy wheel, you'll see things like innovation and entrepreneurship in the strategy wheel. But you'll see as the kind of four main drivers for the new strategic plan, two of them are closely linked to research, and they're closely linked to publishing. And you'll see the one is saying impactful research, and the other is saying internationalization. So when you look at publishing, what we're talking about is how do we publish so that we disseminate knowledge in a way that it can be impactful. Now, unfortunately, being academics, what we tend to think is that impactful publishing means only publishing in high impact factor journals, and if we get a large number of citations for publications. That was what we regard as impactful. But really, we've got to look at it in its broader sense. And in the broader sense, impactful research and impactful publishing, it's about having relevance for the research that we're doing and putting the research out there so that it can be taken up. Taken up by private sector, taken up by industry, taken up by municipal government, provincial government, national government, taken up by society at large. I mean, that's really what we got to do when we undertake research, because just publishing for the sake of putting it into journals which are sitting on the shelves or sitting somewhere in an electronic platform is meaningless. So that is why we're talking about impactful research at UKZN. And when we talk about internationalization, it's about what the impact that we're going to make as an institution on the African continent. So the internationalization aspect at UKZN is going to start on the African continent. We're going to have our influence on the African continent. So you're asking, why am I talking all about this and at the same time trying to link it somehow to open access? Because we have a challenge at the moment, right? If you look at the way that we publish at the moment, it's restricted. We got closed access. So we take our intellectual property, we give it to some publishing house, there's a copyright that gets signed, and then we pay to get it back. We pay to actually have use of it. And so in academia, it's fine, because academia, generally through their libraries, will have access to closed access journals. But what about government? What about society at large? What about industry in the private sector? If they don't have some means of getting access to journals and to databases and electronic databases, they're not going to be able to exploit this intellectual property that we're producing. So this is the reason as a drive as to why we really need to see open access. Open access is going to ensure that our research that's put out there is readily available to everyone that can possibly exploit it. Now, there's been this behavior over the years, and I think as academics, we're kind of stuck in this behavior, that we worry more about which publishing house we submit our articles to. We're more worried about what the impact factor is of the journal. We're more worried about what are the possible citations we're going to get. And generally, we tend to believe that if it's a well-known publishing house, if it's a high impact factor journal, then we're going to get a large number of citations. And so in our minds, we then believe that our research is impactful. When truly speaking, our research is only going to be impactful if it has relevance, if it gets into the right hands as to people that can exploit the research. Saying that, there's also going to be a move towards transdisciplinary research. So the way that we've been doing research in higher education institutions to a large extent is that we believe we know what society needs, what industry needs, what the private sector and government needs. So we do the research, and then we try to force it down the throats of them and say, please use this research that we've undertaken. When really speaking, what we should be doing is working from day one with them and saying, what are your challenges? What are your problems? Let's work with you in then undertaking the research, finding the solutions, and then from day one, you have them on board in terms of them wanting to exploit the results of the research. So it speaks to transdisciplinary research. And when we talk about transdisciplinary research, then you've got to go down the road of open access. So there's been a number of countries that have been looking at open access. And I tell you, in South Africa and on the African continent, obviously affordability of access to the major publishing houses and the journals under the publishing houses is a major problem. There's been a chronic deficient funding of higher education institutions in this country for a number of years. So don't believe that the underfunding of higher education in this country is something that's recent and goes back to fees must fall. No, it's been here for the last 20 years. And what tends to happen is when you have underfunding, university management, university executives, they've got to find a way to balance the books to ensure that there's no deficit budget for the institution. So what do you start doing? You start cutting the things that you believe are not so necessary. And over the years, what's tended to happen at UKZN, and I'm sure it's happened at institutions across the country, is the library's acquisition and subscriptions budget has been the target. And it hasn't helped that the inflation for subscriptions and acquisitions for the library is double digits. So the economic climate of the country has meant that we've had the rand sliding year on year. At the same time, there's been global inflation in terms of subscription to the various publishing houses for their various platforms, which means that as South Africa, we see double-digit increases in subscription costs. Some of the publishing houses have started to even go down this road of open access, but you've got to pay in a very large amount of money for open access to your article. And I've noticed this, so I've published as well in the various major publishing houses. And now to have your article available as open access, there's a fee of €3,000 or €4,000, depending on the publishing house, depending on the journal and so forth. Now, I think there has to be a better way of doing it. And unfortunately, there is a bit of a monopoly in terms of publishing globally at the moment between the various publishing houses. And some countries have started to realize this, and they've started to put their foot down, and it comes all the way from the funders. So funders themselves are saying is that the current mode in which we publish is not sustainable. It's not sustainable if we really want to see widespread access to our research, and if we really want to ensure that the research is impactful, that means it gets to everyone that it should be getting to. So you've seen the German government has kind of been looking at different ways as to where they can channel funding. in order to ensure that things go open access. The Brazilians have done it a few years ago. I know the Academy of Science of South Africa has kind of been looking at it. They've looked at a few platforms, working closely with the Brazilians as well. And even some major philanthropic organizations are actually looking and forcing this issue of open access. So I just got an email about 2 weeks ago from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're a major funder of research on the African continent and in South Africa. In fact, at UKZN, they've been a major funder of research at UKZN, investing something like, I think it was about $15 million over the last 10 years in research in our institution. They've now said, if you're funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you've got to publish open access. And they've actually created their own open access platform. So that is the way of the future. And I know we got presentations from the publishing houses over here as well, but there has to be a way forward. I don't think we can continue working in this fashion whereby we sign off on our copyright to our work and then we buy it back so that we can then disseminate that knowledge within our institutions on the African continent and globally. So I think that's the challenge which you face. And I'm not saying that the solution is something simple, because this whole issue of open access is a complex matter. And there's no easy way forward and an easy solution. But it's going to need behavioral changes. And it's going to need behavioral changes on the part of academics. It's going to need behavioral changes on the part of funders. And I've already given you an example of one philanthropic organization that said, sorry, if you want funding from our organization, you have to publish open access. And this is the platform that you've got to use in order to publish. So I think that behavioral change is going to happen. And depending on the lead countries, the Germans and the Brazilians, I think they're going to determine the pace at which we're actually going to move across to probably full open access in the medium to long term. Now, when we're talking about open access, I also want to mention something which has been a plague in publishing in South Africa and globally over the last 5 to 10 years, and that is predatory publishing. Now, this whole drive to commercialize publishing of intellectual property and should we say your research knowledge has led to a number of publishing houses being created that don't have the highest sense of ethics and standards when it comes to publishing. And there are instances where you can submit an article this morning and have it accepted and published tomorrow. In fact, some of them will actually get it published this afternoon. Right? Obviously, you've got to pay a fee. Right? And I think in this drive that we've had to publish or perish, we've driven our academics to this kind of behavior. So they actually start to believe that for their career prospects, for chances of promotion, for building their research profiles, they've got to behave in this fashion where they've got to start to publish. It doesn't matter where it gets published. And some of these emails that solicit your articles are very convincing from some of these publishing houses. You know, they talk about editorial boards, and you see some big names on the editorial boards of these publishing houses, and they talk about the dissemination, they talk about the impact factors and so forth. But when you actually start to scrutinize it further, you find out that there's a whole lot of lies in terms of what's been said. So I think one of the other reasons for going down the open access route is that we want our researchers to be able to get published. Open access will give them that possibility as well. But at the same time, I think the challenge that we're going to face, and I know the Academy of Sciences of South Africa had this challenge because I served as an editor on the South African Journal a few years ago. The challenge you always had is for academics to actually believe in your platform or to believe in your journal. And so even though it may have the highest standards when it comes to publishing and in terms of editing and peer review processes and so forth, because it isn't one of the recognized publishing houses, there's always this reluctance to put your articles there because they don't think it's going to get widespread or people won't have widespread access to it. Even though we know for a fact that open access does give wider access to your publishing and to your articles. So I think these are some challenges which we're going to face. And as I mentioned, we have an entrenched behavior of publishing, which is driven by the status of the publishing house, the impact factor of journals, and citations. But going back to relevance, as a university, we are saying that our research must have relevance, and firstly, it must have relevance in our community, in our region, in our nation, on our continent, and then globally. So if we continue this behavior of disregarding local journals, of only wanting to publish in the so-called international journals, which are generally linked to major publishing houses, then are we really going to be disseminating the knowledge to where it's really needed, where it's really going to be relevant, where it's really where we want the impact to occur? And that's going to be in our region, in our country, on our continent. Because if you look at the challenges which we face in our nation and on the African continent, it's actual access and the financial means to be able to get access to knowledge. And open access is going to enable that. So we're going to make a conscious decision as academics that we have to go down this route of open access. It has to be phased in, obviously, because at the same time we know that there are behaviors that we have in terms of publishing with recognized publishing houses, but I think the recognized publishing houses have also got to start coming to the party. Are the fees that are being charged reasonable? I think we could ask that question. Are higher education institutions and are exploiters of knowledge being exploited at the moment? So I'm not saying it's a simple matter. I think over the next 3 days, you're going to be discussing this. You're going to be hearing different perspectives on it. You're going to be hearing an academic perspective. You're going to be hearing a perspective from publishing houses that are starting to go open access, that are starting to develop platforms for local publishing, national publishing, that haven't quite got that international profile as yet. And you're also going to be hearing the perspectives of the well-established publishing houses. And I think between the three groups, we've got to find a way as to how we move forward. But remember, at the end of the day, what we really want to do is we want to ensure that the research that we undertake is relevant and that the people that actually are going to be using that or can use that research can have access to that knowledge. So those are just my thoughts. But I wish you well over the next 3 days. I'm sure you're going to have some very fruitful discussions. This whole issue of open access, unfortunately, I don't think it's not going to be solved by next year. In fact, the most common query I get in my office is, why is that journal not being subscribed to by a UKZN library? And I think, Joyce, you can see my gray hairs, right? Since taking office. I'm sure you're dyeing your hair, but that is the biggest challenge. That is the biggest challenge that we're facing as an institution, is how do we get full access or reasonable proportion of access to journals and to publishing platforms, electronic databases for our researchers so that they can exploit that knowledge and then generate new knowledge in that way. And so the next time I think I get a query, I just want to let you know that we as an institution have realized this. We are looking at innovative ways, and Joyce and the team have looked at innovative ways as to how we can actually get access to various articles and publishing houses You may not get it instantaneously, but they promise that they will give it to you within a reasonable amount of time. And I think generally it's about 24 hours turnaround time. So we are looking at ways, just to tell you, we as an institution do spend a considerable amount of money in terms of acquisitions and prescribing to various journals. I think the budget, just over 50 million probably. If we had to buy every single journal and electronic base that every single researcher at our institution wanted, I think it'll cost us over 150 million rands. We just don't have the budget. We live in a constrained budget environment. We try to make the best of it. But I think it's not something that's peculiar to just UKZN. I think all higher education institutions are struggling with this matter at this point in time. And when fees must fall, it's just aggravated the situation. But that gives you just our perspective in terms of the challenges that we face in terms of trying to manage access to electronic platforms and to journals. So once again, I wish you well over the next 3 days in your deliberations. And I hope you have some very fruitful discussions when it comes to open access. And I'm hoping in the medium term, we're going to get this behavior change amongst our researchers that we drive open access. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our first speaker for today. And for the next hour or so, Professor Smith from the University of KwaZulu-Natal School of Religion and Philosophy and Classics will address us. The topic of Prof's lecture today is Reflections on 21 Years of Alternation as Interdisciplinary Peer-Reviewed Journal and the launching of OJS in 2018. Prof will tell us what OJS is about. Prof Smith is a graduate of the University of Durban, Westville, now UKZN. He's a founding editor of Alternation, a peer-reviewed interdisciplinary journal in 1996, and served as research chair of the former Faculty of Humanities at UDW from 2000 to 2006. As part of this focus, he assists numerous young academics to research, write, and publish the first academic articles following the peer review process. He is former dean and head of the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics at UKZN, and former president of the Association of the Study of Religion in Southern Africa, where he served 2 terms. He also served as acting dean and head of the School of Arts for 1 year and 3 months. His research interests are history of systems of thought, knowledge power in the humanities, the interdisciplinary digital humanities in Africa, and religion and social transformation. He teaches comparative religion, the main focus of which is Christianity, in the program in religion and social transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Prof. Smith. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me just say 1 or 2 things before I start with the presentation that concern knowledge creation or knowledge production. It was under Professor Diru Soni, the then DVC for Research, that we have decided to change the name of our research office to, I don't know what the precise nomenclature is, but something like knowledge production. Because we in the former colonies live in a particular kind of knowledge space, and that is where the knowledge that we use are usually not produced by us. It's usually not produced by our own intellectuals, and as Professor Ram Jagannatha said, the problem is relevance. So when you prescribe a book, or articles, the examples, the kind of thinking that come from there, the examples are from North America, Philadelphia, New York, wherever, London, in Britain, and so on. So the question is, where are the resources? We can have all the nice ideas about all the nice programs that we want to put together, but where are the material that we actually read, that we actually prescribe to students, where students can say, no, I mean, I know that knowledge has relevance. I don't want to say much about relevance. Let me just say that the linguistic definition, and that is what we use too, is that context is variable. So whatever knowledge you produce will have different kinds of relevance in different kinds of contexts. So you can think about the context as social, mental, or whatever, but context is variable. So whenever we communicate, whenever you hear something, you use some of your understandings as what we call a heuristic device to make sense, and you use assumptions from your own understanding, and that is very important. The second point I want to make is that I think it is very fitting that we have this, oh, there is Faith. Thank you, Faith. Thank you for also thinking about me, and Alternation for inviting us. The second point is, I think it is very fitting that we have this meeting in the seminar room of the African Indigenous Knowledge Systems Center of Excellence that we house here at UKZN Westville campus. I think why it is fitting is that if you just look at the posters, it tells you something about the kind of focuses, the kind of what we call the objects. What are the scientific objects? What are the kind of things that we problematize and that we study within the African context? Because if we objectify that, if we problematize that, and if we find methodologies, develop methodologies and concepts to describe and to produce the knowledge for that, then we produce knowledge that is contextually relevant. And that is important. And that is what we are trying to do also with Alternation, that we have been trying, that we are continuing to try to do, and that is important. And just last week, I read a paper at the Zululand University Humanities and Social Sciences Conference where I explained how to conceptualize decolonization, for example. And the basic idea is that the body of knowledge, most of the body of knowledge that is being prescribed in the former colonies in Africa are very diverse. It has been produced, very diverse institutions all over the world, especially in Europe and America, but they are not relevant to our context. And you can actually say that it is something like a monolith, something like a statue, something like a Rhodes statue, that people say this represents what is not relevant, and we don't want this anymore. We want to do away with this. And this is where the academics come in. What kind of knowledge do we produce, and how do we produce it with our students, and how do we do it together? Because I know that there are some people who criticize this already, but I believe that knowledge is produced by a professor, by an academic, together with the student. You are on the frontiers of knowledge. And it is on the frontiers of knowledge where you do not stay within the limits of those frontiers, but where you go outside, where you project ideas outside those frontiers of knowledge. Okay, right, just something about my title. I changed the title a little bit because it is open access, International Open Access Week. A student of mine and I did a paper on African digital humanities a few years ago, and we will do another one shortly. And I thought I will include the notion of the African digital humanities in my presentation. Not much, very, very short. And then OJS, it stands for Online Journal Editing System. And in May, ASAF, the Academy of Science of South Africa, Susan Felsman and Ms. Ina Smith did a workshop with about 20 to 30 editors who are editors of national and international journals in South Africa about how we can start to move our journals to the OJS on the UKZN platform. And that is what I'm at the moment the editor of 2 journals. Alternation, the one that I founded in 1996 as a peer-reviewed. We actually, you know, when you want to found a journal, you have to have at least 2 years background or 2 years publishing going on before you can apply. So we actually founded the journal in 94, and in 96 we received accreditation by the Department of Higher Education and Training for the journal as a peer-reviewed journal, also evaluating your proposal in terms of your peers, what they are saying, their submissions and so on, nationally and internationally. So we are all in the process, in various stages of moving our journals to the OJS system on the UKZN platform. And I will say a little bit more about that just now. But before that, I want to well, that is the content. I will just say something briefly about alternation. I'm not going to talk about the content of alternation, not about the what. I will only mention the reasons, the rationales. But today, and because I think there are many librarians here, how many of you are from libraries and are in our librarians? There must be quite a number here. Yeah, there's quite a number. So today I'm going to talk about the how. I'm going to talk about the how of alternation on the one hand, but also about the digital humanities. And I will say something about those other topics that I have there. Right. The first point, we as humanities academics, we always have a philosophical starting point. And my philosophical starting point is with the philosopher, the French philosopher Michel Foucault. He is one of the greatest philosophers in my understanding, in my appreciation of the 20th century scholarly production, and he has influenced numerous feminist scholars, African scholars, and so on. And he's influenced Edward Said, if you know post-colonial studies, Edward Said's Orientalism tremendously. And the important thing about him is that he developed a method of analyzing and interpreting discourse in history. That is what makes it so important. How do we analyze discourse? And this is not the linguistic approach. This is the Foucauldian approach that we just call the method that he has developed. And the important thing, and I've just printed a few pages from an article that was published in 1982 on power. And the article is called The Subject and Power. Now, the important thing about Foucault is that in the first part of his academic career, he developed this methodology about to analyze the history of the discourses of knowledge. He developed that in terms of the knowledge itself. And then in the 1970s, he said, okay, but if we have in history these production of various discourses that have been produced as knowledge, they also impact on people. So what are their effects? And his definition of power is not an entity that you have. It is not something, sometimes we say that is a powerful person, that is a powerful leader, because that person has got the power and he or she decides who shares power with him or her. That's not how he thinks about it. Power is the action of people on the actions of other people. In other words, and nowadays, and I think even somebody who have won the Nobel Prize this year is actually specializing in behavioral management. In other words, how does knowledge impact people? How does knowledge, and in Foucault's terms, we would say, how does knowledge impact the behavior of people? How does actions, my action to produce knowledge, my action to publish and open systems, online systems, for example, what are the impacts of that? And as Professor Ram Jagannath has said, unfortunately, at the moment, there's a huge gap between the so-called citations that you get and the so-called open publishing that we have. When we published Alternation for the first time in 2012 on an open access platform in the Joomla system at UKZN, in the first year, that one had a counter to it. We received over 100,000 hits. So how do you translate 100,000 hits? And we don't know how many, there was no system to check how many downloads, how many only checked the abstracts or whatever. But there was over 100,000. Now, I understand that the system that we are on now does not count the number of hits, downloads, and so on. But these will also improve. So we will see how that develops. Right. Just at the bottom of that slide, the 2 pages from Foucault. Okay, let me just say the first page. He says what has interested him, where he reflected back on his academic career, was how are we subjects of knowledge? How are we subjects? How are we subjects of power? And how are we subjects of our self-formation? In other words, whenever we talk, whether you're a librarian, whether you help a student, whether you're an academic, doesn't matter what, if you produce knowledge, you exert power, and that feeds back into your own self-formation, but also the self-formation of the other person, so to speak. So, and whatever we want to say about knowledge, power, and the self, the principal thing is this is all constructed. Nobody has given us, there may be some natural laws about splitting the atom and so on, but how we split the atom was done by us as human beings, and the knowledge that we have developed about that was done by us as human beings. So I'm not talking about science. I'm in the human sciences, not in sciences. Okay, what does Foucault say? You can read the paragraphs, and when you read philosophy, you will know that whenever people write philosophies, they say something, then they say the same thing in a different way, and then they say the same thing in a different way again, and then in a different way again. So when you read through it, and that's actually very helpful because you get different angles on the same idea when you read philosophy. I'm not talking about certain kinds of philosophies which are not really relevant in Africa at the moment. But the first thing he says is capacity. What is the capacity? What is your capacity? What is the institutional capacity to produce knowledge? And we can research that in history, where different institutions, according to different, and we can analyze the ideologies, we can analyze the ideas that fed into the knowledge that was produced in that. Okay, but what is the capacity? What is the infrastructure in terms of which this knowledge has been produced? So on the one hand, we can ask the historical question about infrastructure, and as we have in South Africa, Bantu education that we have been saddled with since 1953 until 1994, when it was abolished, basically had a certain infrastructure where there were no resources, not equivalent resources allocated to so-called black schools. And we still reap the history of the effects of that decision, that there was no equality and so on. Okay, but what is the capacity? But we must also ask ourselves today, in this digitalization of the world that we are living through. And for many people, this has only started. We only started with the OJS system at UKZN this year, in 2017. So for many people, we are at the beginning of it all. So the question is, what is our capacity? And somebody already mentioned, I think Professor Ramjagannath, or our chair, mentioned that the question at this point in time is capacity. What capacity do we have to really not only create the systems, but produce the knowledge? So the capacity issue is important. The second thing that Foucault mentions, and I quote, relations between individuals or groups, unquote. In other words, what we call nowadays networking. What is your network that you are developing? In terms as a knowledge producer, and as you know, the knowledge that you produce have power effects. What is the network, and can your students benefit from the network that you are developing locally but also internationally? And that is also for many of us. We have only over the last few years really started to put our heads together to say, oh, no, networking is an issue. We must do more of that. So you create your network, and important for a network, you can think about a network something also like the roots of a tree. The network is like the roots. They go out in different directions. You don't do everything you do only with one kind of route. There are different routes. In the network, there are different avenues and links and attachments. And you do different things and focus on different themes for different people and so on. Okay, so networking is another issue. Then the third one. He talks about the ensemble of actions. Now, his notion of the ensemble, what is the collective understanding of what he elsewhere calls the knowledge power? What are the ensemble of actions in knowledge power production, dissemination? Professor Ramjagannath has referred to knowledge production, knowledge dissemination, knowledge generation. Now, the question is, what is the ensemble of the actions that we are taking? And to have a library, that is part of the university's action, to really provide something, and I'm not going into library science here, but there are numerous actions that the university is taking. And Professor Ramjagannath has said referred to the wheel of planning in the university's 5-year plan, innovation, etc., etc. I'm not going into that. But we must also objectify our action and say what are the best, and how do we package this ensemble of actions. Right, and then Foucault says, right, these are not uniform. They are diverse. They are diverse initiatives that people are taking. And that is what I have seen throughout my life. If you have different people building and developing different kinds of networks of scholars, there are different initiatives. And in this ever greater democratizing of the world, by the way, my paper at Unizul was called #Decolonial Enlightenment, where I drew on Immanuel Kant, that basically used the old Latin saying of sapere aude, think for yourself, think for yourself. That is we need more of that in Africa, to think for yourself, or to be wise, to intervene and to develop. And we need more people to take initiatives, but then to say, how do these initiatives link with one another, and so on. So the other notion that he uses is that despite this diversity, they also aggregate. He does not use the word aggregate, but they aggregate, they compound to form blocks. What kind of block of knowledge? And as I've referred to the notion of Rhodes must fall, there's a monolith of scholarship in South Africa at the university, which constitutes such a block. It's diverse. It's in the disciplines. It's dispersed. But it's such a block. And the anger of the students, it is that powerless anger and say, but listen, we can't use this. It's not helpful. We want something else. And Rhodes' statue was that object that they said, listen, that this represents this for us. We want to do away with this. So that is the context. And we need to also then say the diverse initiatives that we have been taken in the African continent and in South Africa, and there has been many, and also in our university, the old former UDW, all the new programs that we have created, the new departments and so on. These are all initiatives. I know many people don't like and don't the Council for Higher Education and Training, but they have been the facilitator for transforming academia. It's for us to come up with the ideas to do that kind of transformation. Right, alternation, I will just quickly run through it. Here at the old UDW, L block just down the road, or down the walkway, had a tea room on the first floor. And this is where a number of us conceptualized the journal alternation in 1992, 1993, and also the then Center for the Study of Southern African Literature and Languages. And why we focused on literature and languages is because in the anti-colonial struggle and in the anti-apartheid struggle, it was the literary scholars who wrote, the people who took up their pens and not their swords, who created a critical tradition against different forms of colonialism since the 19th century and even before. As I have given explanations in my lecture on Thursday, and how that, and we wanted to take that further into and develop that further in an interdisciplinary way. So I just say at the bottom of the slide, the rationale and impact. The rationale was to construct an interdisciplinary discourse in the arts and humanities focused on Southern African literature and languages, and to study all literatures and languages in South Africa on a par with each other. The same theories, the same concepts, doesn't matter what language the literature was in, that is what we've done. Then, in '94, we established the center with two staff members, Professor Johan van Wyk and Professor Jean-Philippe Wade. We founded and published the first two issues of Alternation as an interdisciplinary journal. Over the last few years, we've started to talk about the transdisciplinary nature of our research, but in principle, it means the same. Inter means where there are different points of contact between different disciplines, even if the methodologies differ. Maybe the methodologies are the same, but even where the methodologies differ, maybe there are thematic contact. The first student intake of masters and PhDs in '94 and so on. And then in 2003, Professor van Wyk retired, and we closed the center, CSAL. Up to that point, we generated submissions by people, mainly literature and language scholars, that sent articles to the center, and that is from our wide network nationally and internationally. But then, with the merger of the university, we had to put our heads together and say, do we want to take alternation further or not? So everybody said, yes, we want to take it now further, but not as an interdisciplinary journal that studies literature and languages, but just as an interdisciplinary journal in the arts and humanities, cutting across the disciplines, because we've had different people participating from the disciplines. So from 2004, approved by the university and by the Department of Higher Education and Training, we changed the topic of alternation to alternation, the interdisciplinary journal for the study of the arts and humanities since 2004. So that is basically the background. Maybe I can just mention that, right, Sabinet, government provided money to Sabinet, that is our national library system, but they are also, I think, to some degrees privatized at the moment. But government provided an amount of money in 2006, 2007, and so on, to digitize all the South African journals up to that point. So they digitized. They asked for alternation, so alternation was digitized up to 2008. Then in 2012, I have already mentioned, we created an open access website for alternation, and as I said, within 1 year, we had over 100,000 submissions. Access to or visits to the website. Then in 2014, the university created a different platform, so we moved alternation there. And then in 2018, next year, we will hopefully be fully functional on the OJS. That is a managing system. It is an archival system where you can store your journal, but it is also a managing system in terms of how you manage the journal. In other words, authors submit articles online, and the managing editor divert. We have different editors. Maybe I forgot to mention this. Part of switching to an interdisciplinary journal in the arts and humanities, because I'm not the specialist in all the disciplines, we had to start to co-opt specialists in the different disciplines. So to bring disciplines or transdisciplinary issues out. And so we have, over the years, we've had about 20 different editors for some of the journal issues, and they are still on the alternation editorial board, and all are still active. So when I, as journal manager, receives an article and I know what the topic is and who is working on which project, then from the OJS system, I just divert the journal to that editor. That editor takes it further through the review process, etc. But all the editors, before OJS, I've taken them through the whole process. So we have capacity. We've built capacity with alternation that all the editors can run it the way it needs to be run. Right, alternation, okay, from humanities computing to the digital humanities. Now, in 1989, somebody in America called Tim Berners, he was a member of CERN, that is a French abbreviation that is for physics it's a physics organization, CERN. He developed the first idea for an info management, an IMS, information management system. The first idea, and you can look this up on the internet, is what he produced. And that was the idea that he gave to his head. And this is, as far as we know, the first idea put on paper about the information management system. Now, in the early 1990s, the universities in South Africa decided to put an information management system in the country in place. And I was part of that first group. We were about 10 or 11 of 12. I represented the arts and humanities on that group. And I had to give them ideas similar to this about what we would like to do with this system. Now, the scientists laughed at me. There were some of them that said, listen, why do you need the information managers? They couldn't understand the kind of resources that we would need to be stored, to search, and even up to today. I've just spoken to Ina. Even up to today, we really do not have the search programs to do numerical as well as qualitative, quantitative as well as qualitative analyses of humanities data that we have in our archives and on our system. But just as that's for interest. Okay. At CSAL, the Center for the Study of Southern African Literature and Languages, we realized the need for a digital or for humanities computing. So Professor van Wyk, as the director, attracted Professor Graham Stewart. He was working in the library at Department of Durban University of Technology, and he agreed, and he basically developed himself as an IT engineer and to create software. So he created the software for our Encyclopedia of Southern African Literature that eventually we developed 35, with research assistance, 35,000 units of information in terms of the system that he created, and that was merged with a merger with CALS, the Center of African Literature Studies in Pietermaritzburg. So his work has culminated in that. And then with regard to staying with IT and with information technology and information systems, in 2005, I have had discussions with Professor Rembrandt Klopper, at that time an MIT professor in linguistics, and he accepted the challenge to develop the humanities and the management sciences and IT and governance. So it's not only within one college, it's cross-college that he accepted the challenge to develop the IT and information systems for research, master's, PhD, and also for publication in alternation. In my view, and I have shared this with many people at ASIF, but also nationally, in my view, and up to this day, I have not received a positive response. The arts and humanities must include information technology, management systems, and governance systems. We always say about the BA, people who study BA, they cannot find jobs. Now that has been shown wrong because more than 80% of our people who do a BA, they do find a job, but I don't know what kind of jobs. And that is why I feel that we as the humanities and the arts, we need to interlink with IT and with management sciences on our terms with management sciences as well as with governance. And that is what we've done with alternation. There are a number of issues which Professor Klopper, and maybe I haven't said this, each of the editorial team members, who are now 20, each one has its own, has his or her own network in Africa and internationally, in terms of how they produce research, and one of the main outcome of each research project is to then publish a peer-reviewed journal issue in alternation. That has been our procedures about how we work. Just a definition of what we mean by digital humanities. The digital humanities. This is an older definition, and this has been drawn up by scholars and scientists in America in the digital who started the digital humanities. What we call, they were part of the humanities computing. Professor Graham Stewart, he studied with them. He was part of humanities computing. In the recently, we started to call it humanities, digital humanities. So, and this is a collective definition. They said the digital humanities, also known as humanities computing, is a field of study, research, teaching, and invention concerned with the intersection of computing and the disciplines of the humanities. It is methodological by nature and interdisciplinary in scope. It involves investigation, analysis, synthesis. Now, they have not heard about interpretation. They should have put the word synthesis, interpretation, and presentation of information in electronic form. It studies how these media affect the disciplines in which they are used and what these disciplines have to contribute to our knowledge, and they said of computing, I would say knowledge of the humanities. In the early 1990s, when I was part of that first group who had to develop the information management system for the universities in South Africa, I soon realized that my colleagues in IT will develop the most fantastic system. But what is the knowledge that goes into that? Where does that come from? And that comes from us as academics. We need to produce the knowledge that goes into the systems. And that is where the challenge also came for us to say, let's start the journal. And it must be interdisciplinary. It must link to the critical tradition that we have in South Africa. And we must produce knowledge in that tradition for the transformation of South Africa. The question is how, and here I can just refer to Foucault's notion of capacity, networking, ensemble of actions. The problem is we as humanities scholars must produce that knowledge. The African digital humanities, I'm not going to say anything about this slide. If you look through all the items there, that is what is happening in social media, on the African continent. And what I have accessed on people who have been thinking about this notion of African digital humanities have started to talk not only about smartphones, but smart countries. In other words, how can people access information from their phones? And as far as I'm concerned, for free. Because I think non-hierarchical. I think outside the constraints that the capitalization of knowledge producers have put around capital. So it is thinking about, and that is one of the principal reasons for open access, to really put our efforts out there to produce our scholarships and our knowledge for free for everybody and anybody to access. I think that is empowerment, where people can on their own terms access it. Just one idea that I wanted to share, Africanologist research and capacity development. I've already mentioned how it is different from this monolith that we have inherited that is called colonized knowledge, etc. But it also relates to the concepts of the hidden transcripts in existing knowledge, where there are brief references to the other knowledge. The knowledge that has not been recorded, the knowledge that has been marginalized, the knowledge that has been suppressed, sometimes ruthlessly. And sometimes we find in these sources hints, we find broken narratives for the indigenous people's knowledge, only hints, but nothing more. Their own thinking about the whole modernization processes that Africa went through under colonization. What were they thinking? You find hints. Sometimes, as I have found in my own research, there will be a statement like, for an hour, Klaas Stuurman in 1799 gave an oration of his critique of the settler farmers. But that's all. Of the 1 hour of oration, there's nothing. What did Klaas say? We must go into the archives and dig deeper and find out what was Klaas's thoughts in that particular situation, and conceptualize and develop that as knowledge. In this section, just the last slide, somebody called Jerry Stahl, that I don't know, published an interesting article, and I'm sure this has been much developed by now, about how to develop knowledge collaboratively. African collaborative knowledge building. You can have the references there. You can have it, it can be circulated back to you, and you can look at that. Maybe it's much more developed, but this was in 2000, 16 and a half years ago. Coming to alternation OJS, this is how the OJS website looks like. I've made a number of screenshots. There are quite a number of journals, as I've said, in different phases of uploading and development of their website. I'm just going to show you what OJS can do. These are the two journals. When you open OJS, it's just at journals, www.journals.ukzn.ac.za, very easy. So there you can go, and there's the two journals that I am the editor of at the moment. And you click on view, view the journal. So if you click, then you go to the masthead of the journal. That's our new masthead that we have created for alternation. It is a spear in the image of a quill. Pen is mightier than the sword, etc. A shield, some technology, and we've taken a cover from an earlier journal that somebody did for us about a thinking black woman that we put in that TV on the screen. So you can interpret it in different kind of ways. But in any case, if you open on beneath the journal's homepage, you will see a brief description of the journal, as you see there. Then if you click at the top, next to home is about, and there you can read more about the journal. The journal manager will insert all kinds of information there, and also announcements, all the announcements. And one of the big pluses of the OJS system is if you are registered on OJS, and if we upload a call for papers, it automatically sends the call for papers to whoever is registered. It costs nothing to register. So it democratizes our call for papers even more. At the moment, each editor has his or her own network, and we spread the call for papers, and they spread and they spread and they spread, but it only works through the roots. It's not working out there on a digital platform. So now if we post it and you register it, then it just goes out. Everybody can get it, and you can decide in a year. We normally give about a year's time for a research paper to come in, or to make a presentation at one of our conferences or plenaries at conferences. And I like people to present their papers before it goes for review. Because if you present your paper before, you already get feedback. And if you get feedback, you can work on that feedback. And once you've done that, and they go out for review, then it's already standing on its own feet. Okay? So if you click on user home, there you see information about people, contact policies, all the policies of the journal, submissions, and any other information. So you can just click on any of those blue items, and it will give you all the information that you need. Right. I didn't know whether there will be journal managers. I don't know. Are there any journal managers here or journal editors? There's one. So the journal manager is actually the key person who decides where the articles go, who works on what issue, etc. Obviously in consultation with the different editorial committees, but the journal manager can just click and then it draws down all the activities and the actions that the journal manager must do. If you go to the search function, and this is a fantastic function that this system offers. If you insert anything, if you click on search, and here, so far, I've only uploaded one journal for the purposes of explanation for this presentation so far. The one is called Religion and Society. So if you push that in and you enter, then you will find all the journal articles where that notion, not only a word, not only the name of a person, but religion and society, where it will come up. So it is a fantastic. So for master students and PhD students, this will be one of the important tools in order to develop their own theory, their method. Every article in Alternation basically has a conceptual, theoretical, methodological approach. So it is an extremely powerful tool. So whatever kind of, if once we have uploaded all the journal issues, if you push in a theoretical or a methodological approach there, it will give you across basically the first 2 years too, now 21 years peer-reviewed, but actually 23 years of research that relates topically, thematically, methodological, theoretically, conceptually to your research. And you can source from there, not only from the article and how it is used, but also from the bibliography, the references in that article for you to go further and dig deeper in terms of finding your own kind of approach. So this makes it a very, very important tool. Then the archives, if you press archives, you can upload your journal name, title, as well as your journal cover. And if you press the journal cover, then it comes up. Right, I will go to that one a bit further. I just want to go back to the beginning. If you have not registered, it is important that if you want to participate, and that will become increasingly so in future, if you want to participate in any journal, and journals are going to get published online even more as we speak, you have to register. Now, I have promised that we won't overflow people with announcements. We will announce, you will already know now how many announcements, how many spam messages you get and so on. So we will send out basically 1 or 2 or 3 announcements about presentations maybe, and about call for papers. The important tool for us is the call for papers, because that is where we gather our people that eventually publish. So if you register, you put your username, password, and if you go deeper in the hypertext, then other information, personal information about your interests and so on. I'm not going there now. Okay, once you have registered, then whenever you visit the journal, you can log in. And here, whenever you submit an article for publication, when you go and log in, you will be able to trace where the article sits. Is it sitting with the editor? Is it out for review? Has it come back for review? Has the Has the editor responded to your article, given you information about what needs to be improved or where in the system is your article? And we take about 1 year to 2 years to publish a journal issue. We are not like these fly-by-night organizations. We may shorten it in future, but our responses to inquiries are immediately. It must be within 24 hours. So that is the system. And our review turnaround, once we get to actual reviews of people who have worked on a research project, that is for the research project that I'm talking about, 1 year to 2 years. And the final outcome, a journal issue. So the review process normally takes 6 weeks maximum. We send it out for 6 weeks turnaround. After 2 weeks we remind, and then after every week after that we remind. So normally after 6 weeks we have all the reviews in. Okay, I'm not going to say anything more about the actual managing of the journal. These are the activities of the journal manager and the editor. And the editor actually does most of the work. And many of you might become, if you're academic, a journal editor, a guest editor in future. So you will have to actually create the journal issue online, whether it's with us or with another journal. You will have to create it. And how you do that, a PhD student of mine has produced a document about how to produce your how to produce a journal issue online. And I have printed 30 copies of that. So you can take that, but we will also circulate the PDF for you to use. And if you follow every step, it is about how to create a journal issue online. The guidelines in what we received is not very clear on all these steps. So that is why I requested him to help me to put this together. And so he's very smart. So he put it all together. And with screenshots, precisely how the journal is created, but the whole process until the full journal issue with each of the journal articles is published online. Yeah, this is just about creating the issue. And you can, once it's done, you can click on any of those. And then you get a pull-down menu of all the articles, and you can click on the article title. It will give you the full article, or you can click on PDF. And there again, PDF. And it will give you the full article. I have 5-6 minutes left, so I just want to share with you America, the humanities in America. And by the way, the president of the American Association of the Humanities, or the Humanities Association of America or something, we invited her, and she joined Alternation on our academic research board. She joined us. They have a unit that they call the Office of the Digital Humanities. And this office invites people to apply for funding from different institutions in the digital humanities, from different institutions. But the interesting thing about this is for every digital research project, there is an IT component of people who develop the software required by that project. And the link is on my webpage. This year in 2017, they have allocated 31 such grants, and every grant is $75,000. Now, $75,000 for many people do not go very far, but it is something that you can add to your own resources, where you link the people who produce the knowledge in the humanities that must go onto the digital network and you link it to at least 1 or 2 people who actually create the software for how to use and how to use the knowledge that you produce. So the knowledge that you produce is not only, is different forms of quantification, different forms of qualitative research, and there are a number of these programs online available. I have not dig into those as yet, but I think we will get there. We will, not soon, but in the near future, we might start to require, maybe we will start with PhD students to use some of these technologies to actually research the online published information. Conclusion. So I want to come back to Michel Foucault. Capacity. We must develop capacity. We, and I'm speaking about the humanities, the sciences themselves, and there are numerous people who are boffins, who are fantastically good in many of, and over the years I've come across many that are far ahead of where we are in their own thinking, in their own research, and so on. But the fact of the matter is, many of these publish overseas. They are not taking the community with them. And the other day I saw at the Oliver Tambo a statement, something against the wall that says, those who run the fastest come first, but those who run together, they come the farthest. So we are working together with the communities and together with the people, because in the long run, we will get the farthest. So it's the how, but also the what and the why. And there's my references that I've used. You can click on any of those for references. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got time for questions or comments to Prof, if you want to go ahead. Yes, sir. Thanks.
I just have one question on the length of time it takes to publish. I couldn't help noticing you said it takes 2 years to produce one issue. Is it one journal issue? Did you say? Yes, yes.
Yeah.
My question is, if it takes that long, the researchers may be worried that their research will be dated by the time it gets published.
Yeah, you know, we publish thematic issues. What we mean by interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary is we take a cutting-edge theme, like a few years ago, migrancy, for example. Now, many of the people who in anthropology, social sciences, they've never read anything about. They want, because they have students, they have the issue. We have the issue on the table. So this is an issue on the forefront, but none of them have read anything. So what do? We give them a year for a submission of the paper. They work themselves into the field, and then they take it from there. So I'm saying an absolute maximum of 2 years, but it's a research group, and not all the papers of the research group gets published. You see, so it's not like, do you know Thomas Kuhn's notion of paradigm?
No, I'm a scientist.
Yeah, but I mean, he published it in The Scientist. You should know it, because it basically says when there is a break from one science paradigm to the next, it means that the kind of questions, the kind of data that you're looking for, the kind of research that you do has become ineffective in answering the new questions. So you should know it. You should know the scientific revolution, 1968. You should read it. It is so. We see ourselves as on the forefront of knowledge creation in the humanities. So when we do a call for papers or put a research group together, there are some people who are top in their own field or in the themes that they work with, but who need to branch out. And this is how we develop the scholarship into the future.
Just to follow up to that, many times in the sciences we work on a particular topic,
Yes.
And-
No, that yeah. You see, where you have an organization, a scholarly organization. The scholarly organization, I was president of one, and I belong to a number. We decide on topics per year, for example, and then people work. They have the conference, and then a year later, 6 months later, or whatever, they publish something on that topic. So it's the whole process. But we do not have an organization. We are based at the university, so it's different. It's not like the theme goes out from the national organization. It goes out from the, call it the research collaborative.
Did you ever get an instance where someone's beat you to that issue or beat you to that topic, and you've got something underway for 6 months?
Yeah, no, we don't have a problem. People, I mean, you see, that you actually raise a very important issue. A few years ago at UKZN, when we had to revamp the plagiarism document, you may know that document, there was a big debate about whether ideas can be plagiarized. Now, my field is to work with ideas. And I said, rather not, because in principle, ideas are limited. People use one another's ideas. I see it all the time. But you know what? The university went ahead and said ideas can be plagiarized in that document. I objected, because if you really start to put that into practice, if you sit in a lecture in your science conference and somebody delivers a paper and you take an idea and publish on it, he can sue you under our plagiarism rules and the document. You see, so that is a very, very, so we don't mind. Our policy, people can take our ideas, as long as the people benefit, as long as the ideas get developed, as long as the discourse grows, we don't have a problem.
Thanks, Prof, for that very enlightening presentation. This is a question, I'm not sure whether you can answer it or maybe the organizers can answer it. I took the liberty of sending the link to the live stream of the event to the entire LIS community in the country. I've just had a question from somebody in Rhodes wanting to find out if your presentation will be available after this. I think that will go for the other presentations as well.
I guess it will be, sorry, will this be available as a podcast? So it will be available as a podcast, and I will send Faith my slides, and after this thank you, I just have a few slides showing the current alternation web pages. There are screenshots there, so you can just also closely go through that. But that is, we are in the process, and I hope I've set a limit by February. By February, I would like, it's a long process. It's quite tedious to really link every article into a new system. So I set the deadline for February, then we will have the whole archive transferred to the OJS system. But you will be able to get the slides. Yes.
Jannie, Ina Smith from the Academy of Science of South Africa. I would like to know, when you made the transition from traditional to online, what were the cost implications? How did that impact on your journal sustainability, etc.? Did it become more affordable? What changed?
Well, you see, all these things cost money. So our journal page costs has been some of the lowest in South Africa. So it was about 200 Rand a page. You know, some of the science journals charge over 1,000 Rand a page. So we have moved it up to 400 Rand. But at that time it was still 200 Rand a page. So I paid the person who actually created the site in the Joomla language, as far as I understand it, 7,000 Rand to create the site. That was the first site. And he actually did most of the work. So that was in 2011. And from then on, we didn't have money to pay anybody else. I had to upload every issue, every particular individual article. So as I have said, with the encyclopedia, we had Professor Graham Stewart, because he did his PhD on the encyclopedia. So we have to create our own know-how people. And I think that and what I see happening in the States with this call and the grants that they have given, there are some people in the humanities who are starting to specialize in IT. So it is part of their job to do it. So if they then, and all of us do so many other things that you don't get paid for. So if somebody who's in your group specializes in IT, and this one student of mine who is now hopefully finishing his PhD now, we've decided that he will become one of the 2 assistant editors to me. So he will take over this responsibility because he's an IT boffin. Yeah. So the point is basically we cannot rely on the scientists to do it for us, because they don't understand the kind of software that we need for our needs for teaching and learning and research. We need somebody from in the disciplines to become IT boffins on themselves and to be able to create it.
Just a comment, thank you, Chair. And that goes to actually Professor Kurbonali that asked a question about the turnaround time on journals. Just want to ensure you that not all open access journals has that time lag. And it differs from subject field to subject field or discipline to discipline. The South African Journal of Science at the Academy of Science of South Africa, the average time in peer review is 60 days. So we publish about in 3 months' time, we publish submitted articles or manuscripts, approved articles to the actual journal. So the turnaround time is very quick. So it does differ from one journal to another. Thank you.
Prof, we want to thank you very much for such an enlightening talk. I want to call upon Faith just to give you a token of our appreciation, please. Thank you.